How do you use guests to market your podcast? Specifically, how do you make it so that these guests want to tell the world about your show after they have been on it? This is part of a bigger marketing tutorial that we're running over at captivate.fm/marketing. So if you're in the position where you want to grow your podcast and you're thinking to yourself, I just don't know what to do next, I urge you to check it out. Captivate.fm/marketing. Let's think this through. So many people tell you that having guests on your podcast can build your network, can allow you to leverage their network and their audience to grow your show. But what they forget to do is tell you really how to do that. Back in the day, the podcasting golden era, this is what everyone called it back in 2012, 13, 14, 15. People were saying that we were in this golden era of podcasting. What they actually was saying there is that it was really easy to start a podcast and get a bit of traction. That's really not the case anymore because there are that many other podcasts out there. Heck, podcasting the industry, you are now competing with Wondery. You're competing with Spotify Originals, Apple Originals. There is so much more budget going into marketing podcasts that doing the stuff that you could do back in the day is simply not going to work. So if you choose to have guests on your podcast, and if you choose to make them part of your marketing strategy, you need to do some things a little more specifically. Let's get down to this. The goals of using a guest are not only to get great content, to get great interviews, but actually the goals of using a guest for your podcast are usually to leverage their network. So let's assume that you have someone big name, someone big in your niche, big in your industry on your podcast. You don't want that to be transient. You don't want that to be a transient effect. You want them to tell their audience that they've been on your show. The problem with this is that these people are now on so many podcasts because podcasting, like I said a second ago, is now a big industry, and the PR companies are recommending that people get on podcasts and saying that you should be doing this, that, and the other when it comes to podcast guest strategies for them as an author, as a YouTube producers, whatever. So people are going on more and more podcasts every single day. So how do you stand out? How do you make sure that they share your show? Because I do a lot of podcast guesting, but it's rare that I share the shows that I'm on. I'm on so many shows and it's really difficult for me to do that. What we have to do is this. There's actually a multifaceted strategy that I want you to use to make sure that your guests want to get involved in sharing your show because you want to leverage their audience even more. Number one, what you have to do with your guests is make sure you talk about things that they have never, ever spoken about before. Why? They're talking about the same thing. So let's assume that on every podcast that this guest goes on, they've got a new book and they talk about the new book. That's all they want from your podcast is your audience to be exposed to their new project. What you want is them to tell their audience about your show so that you gain a few subscribers. How do you do that? You make sure you talk about things that they've never spoken about before. You go deep into research. You go deep into the things that they've done in their past or some obscure nuance of how they go about things. The goal with this is for that guest to say to you as you're interviewing them, wow, that's a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that. Because if you can get deep into that, they're much more willing to share that piece of the interview because their audience may not have heard that before. So that's the first thing you've got to do. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to make it easy to share. I've been a guest on so many podcasts. The guest release forms, the guest sign-offs, the emails that come. There was one about 2 weeks ago where the person asked me to sign into 2 Zoom calls, one halfway through, for no other reason than to make their lives easier. Now, that's not going to make me want to share that episode because my experience of that podcaster has been very, very difficult. So what you have to do is make that experience perfectly seamless. Make sure that you are treating each and every guest with royalty, with the white glove service that you come to expect from a high caliber experience. Make sure you're doing that. And the reason to do that is so that they then have an affinity for you and your brand and how you do things, because then you're not the difficult person to work with. You're the person they enjoyed working with. And when you ask them to do something like, do you mind sharing? They are going to do it. The next thing is to have some assets created, whether that's some little audiograms or some images or whatever, some pull quotes. Make it easy. Create the assets for them and give them something that they can use in their marketing. Pull out a really high quality quote that they can lynch to, that they can attach to, and they can share on their LinkedIn, their Twitter, their Facebook, their Instagram. Give it to them. Don't, make it hard. Just give it to them. Give them some swipe copy. Here's a caption for Instagram. Copy and paste it and get it done. So make their lives easy. Last up, in order to leverage your guests, make sure that they know where they're sending people. Tell them to send them to your Captivate single subscription link, for example, sparkofrebellion.com/listen, which will present the listener with an option of choosing Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so on. Give them one link to share, not, get it wherever you get your podcast. No, go to this link, your Captivate single subscription link, which is a free feature within all Captivate hosted podcasts. You've got to make sure that life is easy for your guests. And if you make sure that they know what they're doing and when, if you make sure to give them the very best experience and talk to them about things that they've never spoken about before, you will generate really high quality guest interviews and guest appearances that then get shared.